Recording in progress. And just for, as we always do for our multi-talented, multi-continental audience, I always put this, I sometimes forget, our Zoom coordinates, 325-804-5811, password 285775. And of course, today is a special.
Lev, if they're here, they already know that.
No, but if somebody comes in and watches the video and they want to listen to us live, they might not be able to do it. So, okay. And so today's a special day because it's Rosh Chodesh. We're coming to a tough months, months of Av. Rosh Chodesh just started, essentially a few minutes ago as we speak. Didn't start for Bob yet in America, but for Israel, we're already in it. So we're going to dedicate to that. So let me kick it off with, I'll spend about maybe 5-7 minutes and then we'll have a little commentary. I mentioned my email. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read it, but I know Bob and I sit in the same class on the Gemara on Masechta Yoma.
Pesachim now Yoma.
Yeah, very interesting. We just went from Pesachim into Yoma. We're only on the first page, couple of pages, and this is interesting. I look at it. I heard some opinions that were expressed a little bit differently. And I'm not going to challenge the opinion that was expressed in our class, but just to share some thoughts on this. Let me get into it because Jonathan might have not had a chance to follow that yet. Okay, so basically, let's do this. When somebody is impure, there's a different levels of impurity. If you get contaminated by a dead body, it's one thing. If you get contaminated by a dead roach or a dead rat, something else. Baba, you was asked, you're a little bit frozen.
No, I hear you.
Okay. You're frozen in awe. You were awed, not frozen. Okay, now I got it. Yeah.
No, it's 90 degrees in Atlanta. I'm frozen with heat.
Frozen with heat. All right. You should come to us. We only have like 39 today in centigrade. It sounds a lot less than 90. In centigrade, it's always more pleasant than in Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah, 39 is probably 90.
It's hellish here.
Yeah.
Hellish here. 39 is 102 degrees, 102.
I heard Israel's really having a heat wave.
Yep.
Yeah, we do. Anyway, so coming back to our things. Okay, so the different levels, let me just break it down, not rabbinically, but just in a layman's perspective. Different levels contaminations. When the person spiritually, whether he's a zav, he has a mission, or lots of things. Sometimes it's enough to go to mikveh, sometimes for one day, sometimes you need to go for more time, procedures different. Sometimes if you contaminate it with a corpse, nowadays, of course, this procedure is not done because we're so far, the temple doesn't exist, but basically the guy goes for 7 days, he goes to mikvah on the 3rd day, he goes to mikvah on the 7th day, and then when he comes from a mikvah, it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sunset, let's say at 7, so he has to wait until 7, and then he's pure, fully pure, in order for him to participate in any activities within the temple. He no longer has a do not come sign on him. He can do all this stuff. And between the mikveh and the sunset, that period of time is kind of nebulae area, kind of like we have between the sunset and the stars to come out. A lot of debate go, is this night? Is this day? Is the guy clear? Is he not clear? So they call it Tevel Yom, which is kind of almost clear, but not exactly. So in this particular Yoma, what we're studying is that if the guy happens to officiate a service, whether it's a Para Aduma or Yom Kippur or something like that, I'm not going to go to all the details, he has to become pure. Let's say he's a Kohen or Kohen Gadol. He has to come to the Holy of Holies, better be pure. Well, there's a debate.
Well, this tractate refers specifically to the Kohen Gadol, not the Paraduma.
Okay, yeah, that's I'm freelancing a little bit, and when we come to the comments, give me about 5 minutes, and we can fix it up. The idea is not necessarily, the focus not was a Kohen Gadol, a deputy Kohen Gadol, or the fireman, but basically, okay, he has to be pure. He has to officiate the services. How pure is pure? Well, according to the Torah, on the first reading of it, we'll say, listen, he has to be pure. How does person get impure? He goes 7 days, 3 days, 7 days, mikvah, second mikvah, and then waits to the stars to come out. No, there's a debate. And there's a different denomination of the Jews saw that over the history differently. So-called Pharisees, which is more traditional, if you will, more, and I'm making very, very approximate analogy, just for the layman, since we're not that smart. And I'm not that smart, guys. No, you guys are. I'm not that smart. So I'm making a simplification here. They would say, let's call them Pharisees for the lack of, and even among Pharisees, there's also a little bit of subdivision, and it's a very complicated gradations. They were also similar to what we today have Reform Jews and Orthodox and conservative and Hasidim and Haredi and not so Haredi and whatnot. Similar things happened in the past, but overall, for simplicity, Pharisees group basically felt we go by the oral Torah. There is a written Torah, and the oral Torah was transmitted to Moshe. Moshe gave it to Yeshua, and on and on and on and on and on. And to this day, we still have that, and we believe in the written Torah and the oral Torah, and that's a Torah for us. And the rest of it, writings, prophets, and all that is also part of a tradition, part of a Torah, so to speak. So the oral Torah commodifies the written Torah, according to Pharisees, saying, no. For that particular event, it's not that strict. The guy has to come to the mikveh, and after he comes from the mikveh, he doesn't have to wait till the stars to come out. He is ready 3 o'clock mikveh, and 4 o'clock he can get on with his business. Sadducees would say, no. Torah says, wait till the nightfall, wait till the sun, wait till the stars, wait for the stars. And that was a major dispute. It's almost like if you guys read Gulliver or Gulliver, how that's in English, I don't even know. There was a group of people, when they eat eggs in the morning, they'll break them from a dull end or from a sharp end. And they argued bitterly that it's not really from a dull end, and similar bitterness with that. And more so, in order to make a point that Pharisees would say, you don't have to wait, they would even come to the Kohen Gadol, they touch him with a rat. He goes to touch him with a rat or share or something, and the guy is now contaminated. There's no question. No question. He's contaminated. We just touch him with a rat. He goes to the mikveh, comes from the mikveh at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, ready to do the service. Now he's not waiting. So in other words, and they'll look at Sadducees, and then of course in our class, the statement was even brought out with a gusto and enjoyment, and we stick it to them so they know better how not to agree with us. We really got it. How do you like that, guys? So it was almost like a kids playing the playground. This is my toys. They see it. My mom wrote it down. This is for Bobby. This is for Johnny. We got him to that. And poor Sadducee was saying, well, why are you guys so rough with that? Because you don't acknowledge the written oral Torah. And because you don't acknowledge moral Torah, you're the heretics. And we're just sorry for you to exist. And that debate goes back and forth, back and forth. The question will come in, well, why couldn't the Pharisees just wait? Okay, let's say you believe they don't have to wait. But wait anyway. Wait till and then do this. There could be accommodations, but no, Dafka, we're not going to accommodate you guys because you're bad. We could accommodate you, but we're not gonna. Really Jewish attitude, ain't it? So let's see, if you look in the things, I looked up, now this is just emotional side of that. Now rolling down the tape, I from a Torah, this is now where chapter 19 of Bamidbar in the first Chukas. And then chapter 18 says, and this is in the Hebrew, and the Hebrew is more descriptive, says, Ish Tahor, a pure man, has to do and has to clean up his dwelling, his tent, his house. Sprinkle this, sprinkle that. That's a pure man. A pure man, in English it would say. The next one, so he's purifying his home, his dwellings, his clothes, whatever. But what about the guy itself? The chapter, the next verse, verse 19, says, has not the ish tahor, but hatahor. And hatahor translated the pure person. So it's not a pure person, not a pure man, but the pure person. So Pharisees would say it is clearly means, because you didn't have to state, if you say a pure man shall do the 10th, it could say, and he also should do you. Could be he. Why to say the pure person should do you? And because it doesn't say he should do it, but the pure person should do it, that means there's certain meaning attached to that. Torah doesn't waste his time on words. That means he doesn't have to go, he doesn't have to wait for the 3 stars to come out. It's not that his brother can do it, it's not that his mother can do it, but Davka, it means that he doesn't have to wait. Logic beyond reproof. Perfect, isn't it? So there's a midrashic sources and other discussions that, of course, not brought out by the Pharisee, because then Sadducees could tell him, we'll stick it to you guys too if you want to. And those sources would say, all right, maybe the reason that number 19 pasuk says not the istachor, but hatachor, not the pure man, but the pure person, because it means it doesn't have to be the same guy who sprinkle on your tent. It could be your brother or your neighbor, or maybe even a woman, who knows, or maybe something else. So the change in the language might imply that just simply don't. And when you think about it from a logical standpoint, never mind Pharisees or Sadducees, you can say, wait a minute, it does sound like that when you're putting the pure person instead of the pure person instead of pure man, why does it have to be the same guy? Who says? Torah doesn't say that. So that was something. And then from there now in Yom 43b, I took a liberty about to look it up a little bit. It say, and the tahor shall sprinkle upon the tameh on the 3rd day, on the 7th days. The apparently superficial expression, the tahor one, is meant to imply that he was tameh. This teaches about a tevel yom, that he is fit for the para adumah service. Of course, this is just our group to perplex. We're not scholars by no means, but I just simply, if I would look at my class in logic in school, after that I took some classes, if I would claim to my teacher, I had a very good teacher for logic. If I tell my teacher that it means that he doesn't have to wait for stars, I probably will flunk the class. The guy who says, how do you derive this? So there's some questions about this at least. And that question also brings up the point. I'm going to finish on that. I'll open for discussion in a minute. That overall, there's many other sources that rabbinical quote unquote Judaism, which I'm part of, we're all part of this, doesn't bring in, because then if you bring other sources, your argument becomes weaker. And if your argument becomes weaker, it will be very difficult to denigrate another person's view. And otherwise, it's very easy to denigrate. If you think this guy is heretic, and they have a chutzpah to think that means that the guy has to wait until the stars come out, what kind of people these guys are? We have to kick them out and then throw them into the dirt. I was personally a little bit uncomfortable, and then email exchange, by the way, Bob also expressed a little bit uncomfort, not necessarily with the subject itself, which may be halachic discussion and a kollel discussion and rabbinical discussion, but just the lightness with which you would take another fellow Jew with different opinion and use a terminology with a laugh and a smirk, will stick it to them. I never feel comfortable with that. Like if I don't agree with somebody in Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, or Haredi, or non-Haredi, or Chiloni, I would have very difficulty to stick it to them. Because if it is my brother who believes differently, I don't want my brother to get something stuck into in his behind for that. I was always worried with this attitude. And that is basically what I just want to talk to you. It's the first time I found, of course, too bad David is not with us, because he likes also the views of Karaite. He's not Karaite himself, but he likes analytically to look into the arguments and weigh both sides without using terminology or stick it to them. By simply saying, this is their opinion, and this is this opinion. Oh, very interesting, guys. Let's talk about it. And I think personally, this is the reason, perhaps, in my view, why we've been in exile. One of the reasons for 2,000 years. Because instead of trying to find common denominator, we're more concerned by sticking it to each other. And I think we'll do that even to this day. We take people, we group them into categories. This is reform. We don't go by them. Ha ha ha. Or this is, or they are modern Orthodox. Chutzpah. That gratification, instead of I'm finding in Israel, and Jonathan, you might agree with this also. I'm sitting on drinking coffee sometimes in a plaza nearby me, and there's a bunch of guys, the camel drivers of Beersheba, Sephardi, Moroccans, and Tunisians. And sometimes somebody would ask, like David and I come here, so well, political, in Israel, talk about politics all the time. And one time, are you to the right? Are you to the left, center? And the guy tells me, I'm not to the right, left, or to the center. I am for the good thing. If the Jew is doing good thing, I am for him. That's all. And I think that's something we have to learn from it. And this is the first time we take a specific example, not just generally, Karaites are sellouts, Sadducees are bad. What they're bad? Well, this is a one example, not too broad, but narrow. Because the guys couldn't wait until another couple of hours until the star sets, for 2,000 years would denigrate these people and put them to dirt and tell how dare they disagree with rabbinical Judaism. I am part of rabbinical Judaism, but I don't like when we do that to other people. That's all I had to say today, guys. I hope it was kind of interesting. And that's
well said, very well said. But it's not the only groups that have fought. Jews have been fighting each other for years. We even split into two kingdoms. The actions of one part of Judaism beating up another part of Judaism is as old as
shame on us.
Well, it even goes back to the desert when Moshe Rabbeinu was accused of being a dictator, and the earth had to open up and swallow the guys who wanted to take over. So us fighting each other is not unusual. I agree with you. I think the incident that we read about is bizarre. I think it shows the deep hatred and near civil war that was going on between the Pharisees and the Sadducees at the time. What's surprising is these are very bright people. These rabbis were deep thinkers, and for them to act that way is shocking and doesn't seem to be part of who they were. We did learn, Lev, you might remember in another class, that it was known that the Kohen Gadol was a human being, and he acted like a human being. And if he didn't like you, he would do your korban. He would do your he would burn your bull or your ram or your goat in an incorrect way just to stick it to you.
Yeah.
Right. So everyone, including the Kohen Gadol, is human, and they acted as human beings back then.
Yes. Yeah.
Another way of looking at it is that the rabbis at the time were trying to build a Judaism that would last forever, and that was the source of their argument. But the way they went about doing it was no way to perpetuate Judaism. So in that way,
that's exactly I'm in. But I also saddened, not angry. I saddened that even today we often many of us talk about it with a smirk.
Well, Lev, I don't know that much about Reform Judaism. I don't know what they believe, but
I'm talking about us, rabbinical Jews. We'll talk about incidents today, 2,000 years after it happened. We still look back at them, what kind of idiots they are, what kind of sellouts they are, instead of saying exactly what you just said. And
you have to give them credit for perpetuating this fight. They didn't hide it. They wrote it down, said, here, future generations, you can look at it and see.
I don't know because it's obviously it's no comparison, Hatzvah Chalila. But I'm not going to give credit to Hitler for building a strong army. At some points, credit is not due. For certain things, you don't give credit. For being stubborn and fighting, it's good if you're fighting for something with some logic or some things and say, listen, this is my opinion. What's your opinion? It's another one to tell another guy, you're an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, it shows a complete breakdown in communications, the way they were behaving. There was no discussion.
And it's today. I mean, I David told me an interesting story. Tell you just, and then get Jonathan mentioned, so not to.
Lev, how do you respond to someone who denies the divine revelation of Torah? Well, what's your answer?
The way you respond is the way we are now responding. We're discussing it because it's very generic. to divine the origination of Torah. That subject is a philosophically huge. You can't say yes or no, because if you say yes or no, it's a dogma. It's to put a gun to your head and say, do you believe in God? If not, I'll shoot. What are you going to say? Tell me in 2 seconds. I give you an example. You understand? Give me just 1 minute and I'll let you. David told me this story. One time.
Let Yonatan speak, because we've spoken the whole time.
All right. Jonathan, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay.
The issue for me isn't the divine revelation, it's the interpretation. Lev, you said about sitting around with the camel drivers. For 12 years in the north of Israel, we lived in a community of just over 100 families. There were, I think, 7 synagogues. There were 2 Moroccan synagogues. We had an Ashkenazi, but the Ashkenazi was split up because there was belts, there was Satmar, there was a sort of Ashkenazi, there was Nusach Svard. There was no end of strife, even among the people who were basically using the same Siddur, but their interpretation was different. I don't know if I mentioned to you guys, in the late 80s, early 90s, the beginning of a huge movement for Jewish medical ethics. It was, I don't know if it was started, but certainly the first international Congress on Jewish medical ethics was held in San Francisco. And the big issue at that time, I guess it still is how do you define death? For what reason? So that you can transplant human organs. Mm-hmm. The 2 proponents were Rabbi Dr. Moshe Tendler, who was a biologist, and Rabbi Dr. David Bleich, who was a lawyer and a rabbi, who held, the 2 of them held differing views. And the conference every year had both of them come, and it was, I don't know if you could say enlightening. At times it was very difficult to watch this extremely fine line between 2 Gedolei Hador, Poskim, who had differing ideas on how you define the moment of death. Tendler wanted to define it so that you could actually use an organ to transplant, because Bleich, in his interpretation of what the Torah said, the organ was already autolyzing, it was already dissolving itself, making a transplant impossible. You couldn't do it. And so seeing the 2 of them at it, hammer and tongs between each other, and at times crossing a borderline of respect, was, number 1, fascinating, and but number 2, sometimes a little disheartening, because how do you decide? Who do you go with? Who's more convincing? When each of them are very strong people in their fields. And my self-interest was going for Tendler, because Tendler said you can, I mean, he brought the videos to show it. He brought a goat, and they cut the goat's head off, and the goat continued to walk around with its head cut off, showing that there is still physical activity going on, even though there was complete brain death as far as the body was concerned. And Bleich simply, he wouldn't accept it. He would say, there has to be total cessation. The heart has to have stopped. The breathing has to have stopped. And at which point everything starts dissolving in itself.
Right. Interesting.
Yonatan, what would they quote as their sources for their arguments?
Oh my goodness, that's already 20-something years ago. I can't remember what the sources were.
But do you remember, were they going into other rabbinic thought, or directly into Chumash, or what do you think that was the source of their differences?
It was Talmudic, because they were trying to define at what point the brain no longer works, and at what point the body no longer works. And there was a machloket. There was stuff that was not clear. So
So this is very amazing story, told, very impressive. And I would say, the way I look at it, when people argue, let's say you and I argue, or Bob and I will argue about something, and we have very patiently holding on to our view. You with us? You're a little bit frozen.
I'm sorry, that what?
Okay. Yeah. Let's say you and I argue about something, or Bob and I, we argue about something. When people argue, just from a human standpoint, it's difficult sometimes not to cross the line. Difficult. And not always people can be, even you talk to with your wife sometimes, so you can say, well, that's really stupid to say that. Well, somebody can take offense to that. And some people have a thicker skin. They say this is just said in the hidden arguments. They don't really mean that. So that's not, it's very difficult to control very, very nice, respectable language. But to me, after the debate, the guys should come to each other and say, let's say I'm having an argument with Bob, very high, and I'm convinced, and I'm giving quotes and references, and Bob give me reference and quotes. And we go for 2 hours with each other, and we patient, we stamp on the chairs, and we stamp the things, we can't control ourselves. When conference is over, I would come over to Bob and say, Bob, that was a great debate. Thank you. Let's go have coffee. And not to say, I'm going to walk out through another door. I'm not going to shake this guy's hand because he is complete sellout. And I see, especially after I've been to Israel, my personal view, I'm finding, even though, like you said, in the Hari and the North, there was some machlokes about it, but overall, I get immersed in variety of opinions and views in Israel, a lot more diverse than in America, as you know. You see on the bus and you can see spectrum from pure Chiloni to pure Dati, anything in between, and people no longer surprised. They know it's part of life. And people do not, but in America, I see sometimes, and Hatzva Khalila, I don't want to say Lashon Hara, that opinion of being so right, beyond the shadow of the doubt, is very disheartening to me.
And well, what's interesting when you look at Talmudic discussion is it often becomes vitriolic, but it's always clever and it's always discussion. And it's very rare that the rabbis don't interact on an intellectual level.
Yes.
And that's why when you look at the breakdown in communication between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, it might mean that there was some other factor that was causing this rupture in discussion.
There was,
that's why I thought you were going to have someone, because I know so little about what the Sadducees believe, how they interpret Torah, that it's hard for me to even comment on who they are.
It's hard to come in too, because I'm not really, but I tell you, it's interestingly, from what I know, because I looked at it in a little bit, I talked to a variety of people, and of course in a very limited way. Apparently, I didn't see, from what I learned, they actually had that hatred towards each other. That hatred, it seems to me, is more today assigned to them. It's today's in the 21st centuries. Rabbinical Jews would point the finger and tell how stupid they are because of Talmud. But if you look closely on the actual argument itself was in the Talmud, it's not actually they're polite to each other.
But the issue, Lev, is that the Sadducees must interpret Torah. No one can read a Sefer Torah and get anything out of it. So the Sadducees also have to be doing some level of interpretation. And what we have to learn is, how does their interpretation different than that of the Pharisees, who claim that their interpretation goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu? And that's if you know someone who's a Sadducee, you should get him on here to talk to us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You hit the nail right in the head. So when we come to the point that you point to the Jews today in the 21st century, on the July 17th or 18th, and we'll tell them, we'll make a judgment. We'll look at the Talmud, the 2 lines of Talmud, and we're quoting, pretending our righteousness and our knowledge so infinite. We'll look at this. Instead, at that point, I think, more appropriate will be, this is what Talmud says, just a fact. That's obviously, but the subject, if I was teaching this class, for example, or I think even if Moshe Feinstein say, can you mute it?
They're crazy. This street is crazy. You should get the mayor who's new elect to put a speed bump here.
Speed bump right here?
Absolutely crazy.
Okay.
Alan, can you mute your microphone, because we're trying to have a discussion.
I got it. Okay, so my point is exactly Bob's point. when you come to the point, instead of today in our infinite wisdom and righteousness, to condemn somebody who was 2,025 years ago saying that, very smart people, who should say, well, Talmud says that Sadducees and Pharisees disagree. And Pharisees purposely will contaminate the guy to prove the point that, yes, you can do that. That's what they did. That's not so disrespectful, but not to use a terminology just to stick it to them. Talmud doesn't say this phraseology to stick it to them. At that point, we should say, but we really don't know relationship, how these people have 25 years ago. If somebody knows more about it, maybe we should invite them as a guest speaker and talk about it. That will be a respectful way to address the topic.
Yonatan, Talmud is not the final word, and there's been rabbinic interpretation going thousands of years after Talmud. And I think your discussion about organ transplant proves that the discussions continue. I mean, what you witnessed, I think, was a very positive interaction between two great minds who could not interpret Jewish thought and Torah thought and come to a decision. That's a very Jewish way of approaching a subject.
Year after year after, I went there 5 years in a row, and they came back for this discussion year after year.
But Jonathan, how they were after the conference? Did they go to lunch together and talk to each other and shook hands? And they didn't avoid each other, right? They just simply have different opinions. Did they hate each other?
It's hard for me to comment on that because I don't believe that I saw them talking to each other, but I don't know that they didn't.
That's good. We always have the benefit of what you just said. We don't know for sure.
Leib, I think you look for a lot of goodwill and a lot of sweetness and flowers and chocolate, but I don't think that's necessarily the best way for Jews to interact. I think there are points to where you have to say, I don't agree with what you're doing, and I have to reject it. For instance, just to go into...
You can, but you can't say,
let me make my point. Just to go into another direction, when I look at the Reform movement, and I look at the conservative movement, and I look at their children, and they're doing something that has caused 70% intermarriage, and I look at the Orthodox community, and the intermarriage rate is less than 1%, I can point a finger and say, yes, I'd love to have a dialogue with you, but I think that you have done something very wrong, and you have to do some introspection. I'm sure you agree with me.
I agree with you, but for the minute left, I have to tell you this. I have personally witnessed. I can't generalize on Reform Orthodox. I belong to Orthodox branch of the Judaism, to the rabbinical Judaism personally. But I can tell you, I personally have seen very nasty Orthodox guys and rabbis who ruin people's lives. And I've seen very nice and good and open-hearted people in Reform Judaism who save people's lives. So you cannot generalize that, what they did damage or not. Yes, you can disagree, but you can say, actually, there's this very good story about a Reform guy in Germany, I forgot the name, who exactly what you're just talking, who saved the Orthodox rabbi who criticized him. Guys, 15 seconds left. We can, if we want, we can continue discussion next time. 5 seconds. Thanks for coming, guys. Love you. Stay good. Thanks for joining us on